My Lords, it's a pleasure to follow the noble Lady Baroness Randerson, who expertly outlined the complexity contained within this apparently simple bill. It's also a pleasure to welcome the noble Lady Baroness Blake of Leeds, not currently in her place, to her new role. And I would share her concerns, the concerns that she expressed, particularly about the situation of EEA and Swiss citizens who are already here practising their professions. They're established, their skills and experience are proven. We need to ensure that they are able to continue to do that without stress, without worry, without fear. And some of the experiences we're already seeing with the settled status scheme happening at borders in particular is a great cause for concern. And I would also share the concern expressed by the noble Baroness Lady Blake and many others about the risk of professional bodies coming under pressure to tie trade deals together with the recognition, and particularly, as the noble Lady Baroness Randerson said, the dangers of that whole approach model of reciprocity. I would, while sharing many of the concerns that noble lords have expressed about this bill, welcome the fact that it gives us a chance to really think about professional skills and how this whole area of issues relates to immigration, relates to education, relates to our own skills agenda. I think there's three things that we can think about in this debate. The first, of course, is a chance to assess where we are with Brexit. The second is that we debate that intersection between immigration policy, professional recognition, and overseas development assistance, to which I'll come back. And thirdly, we need to think about the nature of professions in a fast-changing world. We have, I think there was a reference to one of our professional bodies dating back to 1850 something or another. We have organisations that have been set up over decades, many decades, but is our current structure and arrangements fit for the 21st century? So to come to that first point about the state of Brexit, well, this bill is a further reminder that Brexit is not done. It's barely even started in terms of dealing with the fallout. And it's interesting that as we debate, there's the case of the woe of the laborious swapping of the EU-based CE markings for the post-Brexit British-based UK CA markings, involving the retesting of thousands of construction products, many of the products that some of the professionals we're talking about will have to use. And we've recently seen the government acknowledge that they need to extend the period for that because of the complexity. And that really is an illustration of our current situation. And I think that complexity has been well highlighted in this debate. Now, the government outlines how this bill is intended to replace the EU approach with one that's focused on enabling professional bodies to make bilateral agreements with bodies from other countries. Now, I was going to expand on this point, but I think the noble Lord Purvis of Tweed very successfully outlined the sheer complexity and the volume of what we're talking about here, so I won't go over that ground again. And I think we really need to stress about what we're talking about when the government says of opening up global Britain to new trade opportunities in services. Well, that's very much related to how we treat people wanting to come here. And this is where immigration rights becomes particularly relevant, because if we create barriers to people coming and providing the services here, I'm looking at immigration rather than qualifications, then those same barriers are going to be put to our service providers when they go to other places. The concept of reciprocity is something that can be very much employed against us if we are being draconian in our approach. And I think in your Lordship's House we've had a lot of discussion, rightly, and I would very much support it, about the problems musicians are experiencing in terms of operating within the EU. I think we shouldn't forget that lots of these problems have been masked by the pandemic, and as we hope the pandemic becomes less of an issue and travel opens up, a lot of these issues are going to become very much more evident. Now, I want to pick up a few specific points and then come to a little general discussion. Now, in his introduction, the noble Lord the Minister, and I think I heard him correctly, was talking about Clause 8 as a potential way of opening up professions promoting skills development. And it caused me to go back and have another look at Clause 8 because I hadn't really thought of it in those terms. But I think I would very much hope that the government and perhaps the Minister will be able to reassure me on this point, that the idea of putting a publication on a website, a very formal technical publication, is not going to address our issues of the need for access to professional development for particularly young people, but all people in the UK. And I want to raise, this is the first chance I've had to raise this issue, and it ties with some of the issues that the Noble Lady Baroness Fraser of Craigmondie raised about professionals needing to work in the UK to confirm their qualifications, to reach a certain level, to be able to show that, demonstrate that level. And there were visa changes in 2010 that trapped students going across 415 STEM courses and 222 vocational education and training courses. That meant that they were no longer classified for immigration purposes as students, but were classified as workers. Now, the case study that I know most about in this case is for to be a REBA qualified architect in the UK, you have to work in an approved practice for 2 years after you've completed your studies, and then do a final exam. Now, I've worked with the students who were hit extraordinarily hard by that, who simply couldn't secure the immigration status, and therefore couldn't secure a qualification that they paid hundreds of thousands of pounds in some cases for. Now, I think I would ask the Noble Lord the Minister, perhaps not today because it's quite a complex area, but whether the government has really looked at that and how it's going to relate to the nature of this bill. Coming to another specific point, which is the issue of relationship with devolved administrations. Now, a quote from the government document which states, quote, "It would not normally make regulations under these powers in devolved areas without the agreement of the relevant devolved authority." Now, some noble lords looking around the chamber will remember the wrestle we had with the Internal Markets Bill over the need to protect the independent regulation of teachers on these islands. With the attempt to enforce automatic recognition, the government resisted any claim that there was an issue with that at committee stage, and then did, at report stage, acknowledge that there was a problem and bring in an amendment to that bill. But given that that was the circumstances of what happened with the Internal Market Bill, a direct question to the Noble Lord the Minister that I hope he might be able to answer now is, under what abnormal conditions would the government be likely to impose on the devolved administrations rules that they were in opposition to? Just very briefly, I share the concerns expressed by the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes and the Noble Lord Hunt of King's Heath and others about the extensive nature of the Henry VIII powers here. And the Noble Lady Baroness Randerson referred to the avalanche of regulations likely to result from this. And I was having a flash picture in my head, as I suspect many noble lords were, of that grand committee room in which so many of us have spent so many hours, either physically or virtually, over the last year or so, but also, whether physically or virtually, acknowledging how thinly populated that grand committee very often is. And if we're looking at issues of great complexity, great specialist knowledge, there was a reference earlier in oral questions to the number of members of your Lordship's House, but it still seems we don't have enough to fill the Grand Committee room. So I want to come now to a couple more sort of broader issues. And these really tie back to what we have now, which is the transitional arrangements, which we have for particularly teaching and nursing, and preferential treatment for Swiss and EEA citizens. These are, and again, Noble Lady Baroness Randerson referred to the way in which over decades relationships were established across the European Union when we were a member of it. Knowledge of courses, knowledge of training systems in different countries. Those countries, those people coming from those countries are a known quantity now. We're looking at what I'm concerned about, particularly, is the pressure likely to be put on the professional bodies to deal with a global circumstance, to deal with that level of global complexity. And I'm particularly concerned, again, about the pressure that might be put on some professions And I'm thinking here, and the Noble Lord Trees referred to this, the veterinary profession. And I know, and I'm hearing some reports of the difficulty being had, particularly in filling positions relating to meat inspection, requiring veterinary qualifications, very, very skilled, important jobs that are crucial to public health. And are we going to see pressure to let people in with skills that we perhaps can't quantify, don't know about, just because of the need to fill those? So I come now to the sort of philosophy and approach, which is where I may perhaps most differ from most of the other Noble Lords who've spoken up to now. A lot of the discussion is about Britain's competitive advantage, how we're better at this than anyone else, how we can sell this to the world. Well, the thesis I would put to your Lordship's House is that we have a world, a complex, difficult world, with a climate emergency, with huge public health dangers, in which what we need is a great many more professionals, trained people in every country on this planet, able to help the human race deal with the challenges that we're facing. And so I really want to question this approach of competitiveness, of outcompeting others. And I would ask the government, again, perhaps not now, but to really consider how we might use these changes that are being brought in to help professional bodies in other nations, but particularly perhaps in the global south, to develop their own skills, to be able to ensure that they are able to operate effectively within their own environments. And that is something that's in all of our interests. I come back to COVID. No one is safe until everybody is safe. And we need good qualities of professionals in every country in the world, and we have a gross shortage of them at the moment. And I think that's perhaps of relevance, particularly to our position as chair of COP26. In the debate earlier, the Noble Lord Goldsmith was talking about the importance of green finance. And that's a fast-developing professional area in which we're likely to see new qualifications coming up, new demands put on existing qualifications. And how is this bill going to contribute, assist with all of that? So what we need really is not an overarching policy that seeks to encourage a brain drain from other nations. We have to acknowledge that young people and older people often want to travel, experience the world, learn from different countries and systems, and so they actually then become better, more skilled professionals from that experience, which is where I come back to the issue of immigration policy and taking approaches that doesn't just say, well, we're going to try and nab the best from around the world and get them here and get them working for us, but says we can take professionals at all kinds of different levels of experience and skills, perhaps give them some experience here. Our professionals can go to other countries and gain experience, and that is a better way forward. I come now to my final 2 points, very briefly. The first is the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes said that she'd seen a list of what's covered, and I do wonder if the Noble Lord the Minister might be able to share that list with all of the people participating in the debate, because I think it would be useful to all of us. My particular interest is the position of chartered environmentalist, which I don't believe will be covered under this, but it is a formal qualification organised by the Society for the Environment. And we come back here to my issue about needing new skills, needing new professions, needing new ways of looking at the world, particularly looking at the world systems thinking. And, I'd perhaps like to see many more chartered accountants who are also chartered environmentalists. We need to see that kind of cross-fertilisation of ideas. And that does require movement. I was having a discussion about this, and we were looking back not just to our time in the EU, but back further. And we think of some of the most magnificent structures in the UK, some of our magnificent old churches and cathedrals. And they were, of course, very often built by teams of masons who came from around Europe, around the continent. And if we think about environmental issues, the quality of our building, passive house and better standards, those things need exchange of skills and knowledge. And finally, I'm very much looking forward to the speech of the Noble Lord, Lord Seeker, who'll be speaking in a few slots' time, because I think he'll be raising with far more detail and with far more expertise than I can offer. But I think we've had lots of talk about how good UK regulation is. But particularly when we're looking at the financial sector, I think we have some very serious questions to ask when we look at the issue of financial scandal after financial scandal after financial scandal that's been the reality of life in the City of London, and members of your Lordship's House have been taking part in the Financial Services Bill debate. We'll be very much reflecting on that. So is this bill an opportunity to really think about how we can deal with professional qualifications, thinking not just perhaps about competency, but also ethics and fitness to practice? Thank you, my lords.